Pushed into the net by Kylian Mbappé.
Oh, Benyera, beautifully done.
Cornet finds Dembele. The first touch is good. The second is deadly.
Neymar still. Oh my word, what a goal.
Golovin. Lovely finish. Ajax delivery. Guendouzi's header.
Here's an opportunity. Sanchez.
Outrageous goal from Gael Kakuta. Payet again. And Dolberg. Messi again. This time maybe Messi's done it.
It's done. PSG have finally gotten their 11th Ligue 1 Uber Eats title over the line with a game to spare. Lens will be in the Champions League group stage next season. Marseille now have a tricky route to join them though. It could be worse. They could be Monaco or even Nantes, for whom Ligue 2 is now looming like a Monday morning. That said, you can count on Le Beau Jeu, the official Ligue 1 podcast, to brighten up your Mondays, and along with Jonathan Johnson, Jérémy Magan, and myself, Ian Holyman, we've got another belter for you today. Where else to start then on the penultimate weekend of Ligue 1 Uber Eats action for the 2022-2023 season, apart from Strasbourg, where Paris Saint-Germain were looking to wrap up an historic 11th Ligue 1 Uber Eats title. They just needed a point. Andy Scott saw this one.
Loaded down by Diarra, really well played. Diallo's shot, great strike from Diallo, off the upright. Well, Donnarumma was beaten. Habib Diallo is a player who Strasbourg will surely struggle to keep hold of. After this season, he has been superb. That was nearly a 21st goal of the campaign for the Senegal international. Mbappé against Kolan Dagba. It's a great ball from Mbappé from Messi. It is a tremendous goal, and the connection between Mbappé and Messi pays off again. They've been a joy to watch at times this season, and that was the case again there. PSG haven't created much tonight, but the goal comes from Mbappé getting on the end of Danilo Pereira's long ball forward. Messi just jogging into a bit of space. First touch, he didn't look up, he knew where the goal was, fires it beyond cells into the far corner. It's a 16th Ligue 1 goal this season for Lionel Messi. Kevin Gamero laid off a Sanson, great save Donnarumma. The rebound has gone in, and it's Kevin Gamero, the ex-PSG player, who makes it 1-1. Bedlam inside the stadium. The president, Mark Keller, with a smile on his face. The coach, Frederic Antonetti, not getting too carried away, but a point tonight will guarantee Strasbourg's survival. And they're on course to get that now. Donnarumma keeping out the shot by Sanson, but in the end it was not an especially convincing save because it returned the ball to the feet of Gamero, and Danilo Pereira having a fresh air swipe on the line. It's a 10th goal this season for Gamero, a player who won the Ligue 1 title with PSG a decade ago. Going to erupt in celebration here. Strasbourg staying up, and Paris Saint-Germain winning the Ligue 1 title. Paris Saint-Germain, for the 11th time in their history, are champions of France. It's a record. They have overtaken Saint-Étienne as the most successful club in the French game, and 9 of their titles have come in the last 11 seasons, a decade of dominance.
Well, gentlemen, it feels like it has been about 3 seasons coming, this 11th Ligue 1 title. I saw an interesting article in the Keep yesterday, which was to rate the seasons under QSI, under the Qatari investors. This season ranked second last, and it ranked only above the very first season in which PSG were actually pipped to the title by Montpellier. Is that fair, JJ?
I mean, I think it's certainly fair to be discussing how sort of underwhelming this season has been from a PSG point of view, especially when you bear in mind sort of how the season went on break going into the World Cup. PSG were in really good form, and it promised to be quite a successful season, and that's just completely fallen away, since the World Cup. So I do think that that's justified. And obviously there was a massive amount of disappointment at the end of the first season of Qatari ownership when Montpellier did get that title over the line. And that's sort of what kicked PSG into life in terms of getting Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Thiago Silva to come and join the project. I imagine that sort of the titles between 2013 and 2016 rank up there as the best. That was when PSG was sort of, really dominant across every cup competition. And of course, there were 2 cups back then. But, it really does feel like this, like you said, it's this title has been coming for a long, long time. And, it's kind of a relief for everyone now that the tedium of PSG sort of slowly rolling towards this title is now over. And, sadly, it's also detracted from what's been a phenomenal season for Lens as well. But to be honest, it feels like the last couple of title wins for PSG have been somewhat underwhelming. But yeah, definitely this one, would probably top the pile.
It's probably also due to the fact that expectation was so high, wasn't it? I mean, Neymar, Mbappé, Messi for a second season. Also saw an interesting article in the Keep saying that basically when those three have played together, PSG actually have been better. I mean, maybe it's no real huge surprise. Brilliant Brazilian, 7-time Ballon d'Or winner, and Kylian Mbappé playing alongside, they do make a team better. They actually even conceded fewer goals with those three on the pitch, which sort of lays the lie of those three causing PSG more problems than they actually solved. But I mean, Jérémy, I put this in the context of you being a Marseille fan, so that already there's already a little nuance to your opinion on this. But looking at PSG this season, winning the league is basically has become the minimum, right? That's you've got to do that. But what's the real disappointment? They've won it. They're 11-time Ligue 1 champions. It's the manner that they've played, or are we really talking about they've not done it in Europe this season?
I think judges hit it on the nail. I think it's the World Cup in the middle that really split that season in half. I mean, they start the season with 17 goals scored in the first 3 games, plus the 4 that they scored to Lille in the Trophée des Champions. And it looked like, we've all called it in every platform that we've talked to, it looked like Neymar and Messi were just ramping up to be ready for the World Cup. And obviously, Messi did okay during that tournament. So when after that, they don't perform, when you get out of the Coupe de France against Marseille, the arch rival, when you're not allowed to get through the round of 16 against, a great team that is the Bayern Munich, there is, of course, disappointment, because for that second season of Messi, things started so well and everybody played well, and Galtier was heralded as this genius who was able to go from a small team per se, talking about Nice or Lille, to Paris Saint-Germain and just make all those great players play together. And then the World Cup comes, and after that, it just doesn't work for them. So I think it's more all the promises that the first 3 months offered, and then everybody was just waiting for Paris Saint-Germain to collapse. And the only way for them to actually not be disappointed would have been to reach maybe the semi-final and at least pocket the French Cup in the middle of that. Unfortunately, they failed in where they were expected the most. They are lucky that they get that many wins before the World Cup, because all those defeats after the break could have been much, much costlier, because Lens was in such form and because Marseille up until the last months also was playing well. So I think that's probably where the disappointment comes from. The title is deserved, because if you look at the first 3 months, they were just untouchable. So they had taken enough advance to get there, and then they won the 2 games that mattered. They beat Marseille, they beat Lens. They were always able to level up when it mattered domestically. Unfortunately, in Europe, they didn't do it. And then again, that loss, I think, against Marseille in Coupe de France probably pushed everybody over the edge with the rest of the season.
I think as well, something that added to the disappointment happened away from the pitch. It's sort of all the drama that kind of came in like a concentrated burst in Paris over the space of a couple of weeks. I think that sort of really laid bare just sort of how little progress has been made, because at the beginning of the season, it felt like a lot of progress had been made at Parc des Princes. You had Galtier and Campos coming in, this sort of new, power partnership at the top of the club. You had a lot of disruptive influences moved on. PSG themselves championed sort of how many players they've been able to get out over the summer transfer window. Yet, it kind of papered over the cracks. and then everything that came out ever since. I mean, some of it out of PSG's control as well. We have to recognize that, the Galtier scandal was going to come out, regardless of what was going on with PSG. But then you had another season-ending Neymar injury. You had sort of, the Messi scandal with his trip to Saudi Arabia and sort of that endless debate about whether he'd be extended on a new contract or not. I mean, Kylian Mbappe's future, I think, is always going to be talked about every single season that he plays in Ligue 1 with PSG. So, there's always been this kind of pressure cooker away from the pitch, and this time it boiled over, and I think it's kind of tainted what PSG achieves on the pitch in Ligue 1, because at the end of the day, we're talking about this as massively disappointing. Yeah, it is still an historic achievement, to overtake the likes of a Saint-Etienne, sort of outright. People were talking about that as if it might be impossible at the beginning of, the Qatari era, or there'd be this expectation that, PSG would sort of do what Lyon did and win sort of seven straight titles and overtake it immediately. That hasn't been the case. They've been made to work harder than some people expected. So now I think we're in this weird situation where, people sort of downplay the actual genuinely historic achievements, which, this counts as.
Yeah, I mean, just to put this season in context, they've topped the table from the very first game right through, and that underlines the quality. But as you said, Jérémy, it's interesting. It's interesting what the season might have been had the World Cup been at the end of it. I think that's a probably a fair question, but I think also a fair question is now, what the hell next, quite frankly. I mean, just one little side note, Messi's 496 club goal, surpassing Cristiano Ronaldo to become the highest scoring player ever in the Big Five leagues, etc., 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 etc. Messi's going to go. I think that's fairly certain, unless I hear any contradictions otherwise. Kylian Mbappé, more on him in a minute, confirming that he will be there next season. Although I would like to officially start the debate about what happens at the end of Kylian's contract next season right now. So I'd like to say that I claim that first, because that's clearly really the question. Galtier, though. PSG have run through coaches at an alarming rate. Coaches who then have since gone elsewhere and proven that they remain good coaches despite the fact that what happened at PSG and what was perceived to be failures, such as Tuchel, such as Emery. Jury perhaps still out on Pochettino, but let's see what he does at Chelsea if he eventually rocks up there, as seems likely. But Galtier, for my money, has consistently been the best French coach of the last 10 years. He's maybe, certainly in the eyes of the media, been overtaken by Francaise this season. More on him as well in a second. But I mean, Galtier, are we looking at him going as well, JJ? And when you look also, and I think this needs pointing out this weekend, not only, well, our thoughts with Sergio Rico and his family after the terrible riding accident that he had on Sunday morning, but you look at Messi, who isn't at the award ceremony last night, even though he was nominated for the best Ligue 1 player. You have Neymar, who Christophe Galtier said has had trouble traveling around due to his injury, which meant he couldn't join the other injured players, such as Presnel Kimpembe and Fabien Ruiz. He'd gone to Strasbourg with the team to celebrate the title, and yet on Sunday rocks up smiling and very happy at the Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco and Paris, significantly further than Monaco than Paris and Strasbourg. That reflects badly on Galtier. Maybe it shouldn't, because I think possibly those three operate on a level even above Galtier. But what are PSG going to do with Galtier, do you think, JJ?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack in there. I'm glad you mentioned Francaise, because I caught an interesting comment of his over the weekend where he admitted that there's sort of been some approaches for his services, denied that PSG were one of the clubs to have come in for him. But, he definitely seems to have sort of overtaken Galtier as sort of the leading French tactician who's still based domestically. And, I think really PSG and Galtier passed the point of no return some time ago. That's a mixture of things. That's a mixture of the scandal that he was embroiled in, but also, also down to the fact that he and Campos, their relationship has clearly deteriorated over the last couple of months. The season that he's overseen on the pitch, yes, a large element of that is out of his control with the World Cup, but it's still been extremely underwhelming. And the fact that really it didn't ever feel like he was PSG's number one choice last summer to start with. Now, you've still got some of those candidates available once again this summer, and it feels like sort of this is going to be the next part in PSG, trying to move in a different direction. At least that's what we're sort of being led to believe. So I find it difficult to imagine, Galtier staying on beyond the end of this season. I think he'll oversee the final game of the season at home to Clermont, and that'll be it. I do hope to see him back on a bench, preferably in Ligue 1 at some point in the future. I think he's a fantastic coach. My opinion of him hasn't changed. But, we know that PSG is a very sort of unique beast, unique challenge, for any manager, whether they're French or foreign. And really, for me, I think that, Galtier will probably be relieved that it's that it's over, because I think he'll feel a massive sense of frustration at what might have been before the World Cup break and what has turned out to be since then, as well as these constant, sort of not mind games, but sort of power struggles with some of these sort of individualities. And I think you were quite generous in mentioning sort of Lionel Messi not being at the UNFP Awards. He was back in Barcelona watching Coldplay. So it's not just like he didn't turn up to the awards. It was, he was somewhere else, whether that's an indication as to where his future lies, because I know that there's been a lot of speculation that he'll go back to Barca. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, the situation with Neymar, him turning up in Monaco for F1, it really just, it does feel like it's almost an impossible job for anybody, at least anybody that doesn't know what PSG are like and how they operate as a club beforehand, which is perhaps why somebody like Thiago Motta coming back to PSG as manager might make the most sense now, because he knows how it works internally.
I'm just thinking when I hear the words Christophe Galtier and potentially on a new bench in Ligue 1, Monaco springs to mind. More of them later, because I don't see Philippe Clement lasting very much longer. Unfortunately for him. They could perhaps if they're just looking to secure top flight status next season, they could go to Frederic Antonetti, who our producer Stephen Willis has referred to as Corsica's Harry Redknapp, which I think is probably fair, given that Sam Allardyce took Leeds down this season. Although Allardyce pretty much had a mission impossible. But let's get back to the French football. Jérémy, Mbappé yesterday, no real surprise, wins the 4th Player of the Year awards. Justified or not justified? I mean, I don't think there was really anybody else going to win it. Top scorer, Ligue 1 champion, etc. But the real big news, as we mentioned earlier, is that he's going to be staying next season. How do they build around him? Because that's what surely PSG have to do now. And more importantly, who do they build around him?
He said he's going to stay, and what else is he going to say when he's just being awarded Player of the Season? I mean, anything else than just saying I'm going to play my last year of contract at Paris Saint-Germain would have sent the media and the fans in a whirlwind. So he has to say that. But if you're Paris Saint-Germain, what are you doing? You're going to try and hopefully have another season of Mbappé and try and show him that you want to build around him just for him to walk free in 1 year. I think it's an interesting debate into who Paris Saint-Germain wants to become now. And it kind of attached to Galtier as well. Galtier has had a very complicated season, but if he stays next year, he's lived through a season of all these complications, and he's not going to have Messi and potentially not going to have maybe Neymar as well. So he might be actually asked to be a coach now and not a manager of, oversized egos. So he could actually have a chance to perform and show what we know he's good at, which is putting players together tactically and make sure they perform. Back to Mbappé, if you're Paris Saint-Germain, you almost have to really consider selling him this summer, because the amount of money you can get for him right now, plus the amount of money you're going to save by not paying him his famous, a bonus of being faithful to Paris Saint-Germain. I think every single year he gets something like 70 or 80 million just because he stays one more year at Paris Saint-Germain. So his salary plus the money you would make in transfer plus not paying that bonus, you can almost build the whole team just with that money. And instead, what you're going to do is try and spend heaps amounts to try and surround him with players that maybe would entice him to stay one more year. I think it's a complicated one.
I'd just like to confirm to the listeners that although JJ and Jérémy appear very regularly on this podcast, neither of them are on even half of what Mbappé gets as a retainer. So you'll be pleased to know.
Yes.
Although they wouldn't mind, I'm sure. Yeah. Just a couple of the other awards that to run through. Francaise, the coach of the season. We'll talk a bit more about Lens in a little while. Nuno Mendes, the young player of the season. I think that's possibly debatable. Jérémy's sort of shaking his head, looking at a little, not entirely nonplussed, but not entirely in agreement with that one. Is that fair?
Yeah, El Yawahi would have deserved it, but I think it's players' vote, right? So there's no doubt that Nuno Mendes is one of the most talented players we have in Ligue, and he's been good for Paris Saint-Germain this year, I guess, compared to some of his teammates. But I think when you look at the trajectory of an El Yawahi or even a Folarin Balogun, you'd think that that's kind of the players that you want to reward for that trophy, in my opinion.
Well, El Yawahi did get a gong to put on the mantelpiece, probably the first of many that he's going to get in what should be a really stellar career. Although, I'm sorry, Montpellier fans, unlikely to be at Montpellier even next season. He gets the goal of the season for his acrobatic overhead kick against Lyon. I think one of the four that he got on that day, which was an incredible game. And Brice Samba, the goalkeeper of the season. Talking of Lyon with a 3-0 win against Reims. Bradley Barcola, there's a name that many teams could do worse than trying to get right now, although his stock has risen exponentially since January. Lacazette, close to Mbappé with 27 goals, but still expect Mbappé to take out the top scorer awards. Montpellier, 2. Our friend Tigy Savanier, the entertainer-in-chief, and red card magnet with a couple of goals before Nice came back. Gaëtan Laborde, haunting his former club, etc., etc. Nice winning 3-2. A little bit of run of form at the end of the season for Didier Digard as Nice look to build into next season. Clermont 2, Lorient 0. Clermont up to 8th. Pascal Gastien, I mean, really, if Francaise, he must have run Francaise close, surely, in that a tremendous achievement. Speaking of Francaise, where he is next season could well depend on what Lens do in the summer, because they have Champions League group stage football to look forward to. That's because of what happened at home against relegated Ajaccio at the weekend. Angus Turod saw this one.
Thomason, another good addition, another good ball into the middle, and there's the first goal. 15 minutes gone, and it's David Machado who puts Lens into a lead that could be taking them into direct qualification for the Champions League next season. But the former Toulouse man heads the home side just that little bit nearer to taking on the likes of Real Madrid and Manchester City in the Champions League. That's a nice ball forward and a chance for 2-0. Adrien Thomason, the former Strasbourg man. They're just standing back, our Ajaccio, allowing their host to just pick out the passes. Facundo Medina here with the sliding ball through, and a lovely finish by Thomason. Saw the goalkeeper coming out and just took it past him. Adrien Thomason scoring in back-to-back games and sending Lens towards the Champions League. Corner kick, Fulgini looking towards the back post. Referee has seen a penalty. Vincent Marchetti might look bewildered, but the referee is pointing to the spot. Kevin Danso gets the plaudits from his teammates. And a nightmare first half continues for Ajaccio. Umar Gonzalez with the yellow card. The last penalty was taken by Przemysław Frankowski. He's suspended tonight. Luis Openda takes over responsibility and hits Lens into a 3-0 lead 11 minutes from half-time. His 20th goal of the campaign. And surely now they can relax. Simple stuff for Luis Openda, who has enjoyed a remarkable season himself. It's 3-0 to Lens, so we're not even at half-time.
So Lens wrap up second place. Sorry, Jérémy. It's not going to be. It's going to be a very, very circuitous route into the Champions League group stage for Marseille. Champions League football at the Stade Félix Bollard. It just gets me incredibly excited for next season. Third time in Lens's history, the first time in 20 years, and they have been to the moon and back in that time. JJ, Lens, Champions League group stage. We have mentioned this, that perhaps the squad is a little bit underrated in terms of the fact that they don't have massive standout stars. I mean, Seko Fofana, if Lens draw an English team next season, it will be Manchester City flop Seko Fofana, right? I mean, he's their big star. How much rebuilding or how much restructuring is Lens going to need to be able to compete at that level? And given what Franck Eze said, come out and said this weekend about he doesn't want this is not the end. This is basically the start of something to build on, and that he wants a very competitive team next season. And it looks like he would, let's say, consider his future if they were to sell 2, 3, 4 members of this current Lens side.
I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting summer for Lens, perhaps more so than any other French club, because let's not forget, a lot of people seem to think that Lens have come out of nowhere. And okay, perhaps in terms of sort of the last couple of years they have, but Lens are not sort of no-namers in terms of representing France on the European stage. Far from it. The early 2000s, Lens were helping to fly the flag for Ligue on the continent. And it's going to be great to have them back. I think if you could select, sort of handpick some of the fan bases to best represent Ligue 1, when it comes to continental competition, Lens are right up there, along with the likes of Strasbourg, the likes of Saint-Etienne, the likes of Marseille, the likes of PSG, when the fans are actually sort of, wanting to create a positive atmosphere. So, to have them, back in the Champions League group stage is going to be phenomenal. And when you look at sort of how this Lens project has been put together the last couple of years, it's kind of a bit similar to Brighton in terms of the fact that it's rooted in very, very smart recruitment, and squad building. The club is very well run from the top down. And they will always make, very pragmatic decisions. So how that relates to transfer dealings, if a really attractive offer comes in for a star player, you'd imagine that the club will consider it. But equally, they have empowered Franck Eze, to now be in a position where he can perhaps sort of veto or try to make a case for, a star player spurning interest from elsewhere and staying on and sampling European football, Champions League football, no less, at Stade Bollard next season. And, we've already seen Fofana reject a potential move away to stay with Lens, at the beginning of this season. He was asked about his future before the UNFP Awards and basically said, look, I don't want to say that I'm staying, and then offers arrived and I end up going. But equally, people assumed I was going last season and I ended up staying. So, he's sort of basically leaving his future up in the air without sort of, throwing any petrol on the fire. And, I think as well with Eze, I do think Lens will look to back him because they know that with this squad, they can't really expect to compete both domestically and continentally, but also at the same time, there has to be some way to potentially fund, a major addition or major additions to the squad in multiple positions. So you do wonder if sort of the first big offer that comes in for maybe an Openda, maybe a Fofana, whether that will be considered, by the club to potentially get some business done early and then spend the rest of the summer rebuilding. But equally, Lens will now have cropped up on the radars of many selling clubs. So when they come in, suddenly, I think that price tag that they're asking for is going to be a lot higher, which is going to make it trickier for Lens. And let's not forget that Gisolfi, who is the sort of architect of their last major transfer window, has now left to Nice. This is going to be a big challenge for Grégory Thiel, who is overseeing now the sporting side of things for Lens. So, Yeah, I mean, like we were saying, it's going to be a fascinating summer, but, who wouldn't want to join that project at this moment in time? There's just so much positivity surrounding there. And I'll be honest, it'll be really sad if we don't see Francaise or Seko Fofana part of that Lens team, taking to the pitch for the first time in the Champions League next season.
Absolutely, I'll second that. I think that Ayres is probably playing a fairly clever game. He knows his stock is incredibly high. He as a Lens will be fully aware of that as well. And he does seem to have, since Gisolfi left, basically, full powers. The sort of old school English manager, where he's almost taking care of absolutely everything except being basically the quote unquote tea lady who pops around the office with the cakes and the tea as apparently they used to in the 1970s and 80s at British clubs. I think also probably, Jérémy, I think it's a fair point that we can say Lens have proven themselves. I take the Gisolfi point, but Lens have proven themselves to be able to pick the right players. Look at Adrian Thomason coming in January, a player I have to say I always thought was a higher standard than he ever got to play with Strasbourg or with Nantes or with, I think was he at Saint-Etienne as well on loan, or am I making that up?
Definitely Evian. I think we all remember.
Yeah.
Evian right at the start, yeah. So they've proven themselves to be able to pick those players like Openda to come through and step up a level. How confident are you that they'll be able to step up a level next season in the Champions League?
That's the real question, right? When we talk about Francaise being now the best tactician in France, can he do it when he's going to have to coach his team every 3 days? Is a real test, I think, for Francaise. As far as the team goes, you almost hope that people remember that when Montpellier won that title and all their players got bought over, only one really, maybe Giroud, kind of made it to the bigger stages, and the other ones had a bit of a harder time, and it was the same, I guess, for Lille a couple of seasons ago. So you always hope that not everybody is going to jump on this Lens team thinking maybe they're not ready for the bigger stage. They're good as a group and not as good as individuals, so maybe they're going to keep them there. But if they get just a single result in the Champions League next year, then that they're all going, the Densos and Medina and Abdul Samad in the middle of the park. So I hope that he's going to be able to keep everybody by just telling them that you've reached the second spot. You've convinced everybody, as you were saying, Ian, that you're a great team together. Stay there and compete in the Champions League level together and show everybody what we can do. It's going to be, bringing the people that have the experience of those games, or taking the bet of the Adrien Thomasson, who was, fighting for relegation in Strasbourg after an excellent season last year, and then got out and helped Lens because it truly helped them getting to the Champions League this season, finding the right people that are ready for not only a bounce back, but a bounce back at a very high level. It's the trickiest, but like you said, Gisolfi did it well, obviously taught Francaise well because he's got the right people as well. Can they keep doing this? Can they keep the Luis Opendas? Can they find the right back? I think that's probably the only spot where they really need to find somebody, because this year they were trying with a few different players. They will likely keep some of their best talent. I'm really looking forward to seeing that Champions League, and they're going to be in the fourth hat. So you're going to see at least two very good European teams visiting them. If we are lucky as neutral, maybe not so much as a Lens fan. Three big teams as well, but it'll be a real test for all of them. And if they can make it, I think next year is when you would see the players' exodus.
Interesting summer then, no doubt at Lens. It's also going to be one down the south coast for Marseille. Now, it certainly was last season already, last summer, 12 new signings, lots of ins and outs at the Stade Velodrome. A defeat on Saturday at home to Brest, which it's really been the Achilles heel, their form at the Velodrome this season. Marseille have been fantastic away, slightly underwhelming at home, which I believe wasn't the case. It wasn't the case. Underwhelming couldn't be used to describe the pre-game celebrations at the Velodrome, which I believe was for the 30th anniversary of France's so far only Champions League victory, when Marseille beat AC Milan. Basile Boli with that header to win the very first actually Champions League. But I think there's a point here as well, and very very similar to PSG, is that this now looks like a disappointing season for Marseille, finishing third, finished second last season, and yet Igor Tudor's side right now has 73 points. That's 2 points more than Jorge Sampaoli's side finished with in second last season. Jérémy, as a Marseille fan, disappointed or just, well, this is an exceptional season from Lens, exceptional season from PSG, and third was pretty much the best of the rest?
I think it's true for PSG and Lens. I think for Marseille, talk to every Marseille fan the day Tudor is appointed and say you're going to finish third this season, and everybody would have signed. I mean, they would have signed without him at that time as well. But it is a great season what Marseille have done. I think the disappointment is definitely just the what could have been, and the results at home. Losing against the Ajaccios and Montpelliers and Lorient, when you're able to beat bigger teams and better teams. Not being able to beat PSG or Lens in Ligue 1 at all is also probably a true testament of where they are on the table, is where they belong. But I think that's where the disappointment comes from. It's 2 seasons in a row now that the home form is what basically is the issue for Marseille, and it's not something that, of course, any Marseille fan wants to live through. So I would think that's where they're trying to find, what they should do to, I guess, fans want to win, and they can't do it at home. But if you look at it, can you call a season disappointing where you have more points than last year, when every single weekend at the Stade Vélodrome, it was completely full? Last year was great under Sampaoli, but the excitement wasn't as big as what it's been this year. So I think everybody's been really excited. Fans have behaved this year in Marseille, and, it's not every year that you can say that. Probably you can never say that. Fans behaving for a whole season in Marseille. So they have this year, and they're just waking up now at the end to sort of slight complaining. I think the disappointment comes from the home form. This weekend probably it's a bit harder because I'm sure some of our listeners have seen that, but the whole weekend was full of celebration for the 30 years of the Champions League, which is, it's sweet, but it also shows that for 30 years you haven't won anything. But it was great. Marseille looked like it was burning on Friday night, and on Saturday, the tifo that the fan put together was just beautiful. And every time we celebrate that, we of course open the conversation about what actually happened 30 years ago. So there's always that bittersweet feeling with it. And then when you do all this outside of the stadium and during the game, you lose 2-1 to Brest without really the right fighting spirits. I think that's where the disappointment comes from Marseille fans. They know what can happen. They know what Tudor wants to do and wanted to do, and what he did, and then they saw all the failures. So it's the what could have been. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, but I certainly do hope that Dorsey at Marseille, and finally we build a team where the coach and the club is more important than the players, and equally as important as the fans.
I think as well, expanding on what Jérémy is saying, certainly with regards to sort of the home form and whether this is a disappointment or not. I think the disappointment, certainly from an outsider looking in perspective, probably comes from that expectation that they really could have won some silverware in the Coupe de France after knocking PSG out. And then for that home form to come back and bite them once again at home to Annecy, who are still fighting for Ligue 2 survival at this moment in time. We mentioned Adrien Thomasson earlier. Funny little tangent to go off on, but he's actually part of the ownership structure at Annecy, where he's invested in the club, which could create quite an interesting dynamic should they ever play in the same league. But no, so for Marseille to lose and go out at home in the Coupe de France against Annecy, having knocked PSG out, I think that was a huge disappointment to the fans. Also, that last-minute heartbreak as well in the Champions League. To go out of not just the Champions League group stage, but Europe altogether with that last-minute goal that silenced the Velodrome. I think there's been some kind of traumatic moments for the Stade Velodrome crowd, which is probably tainted moments of this season, because OM managed to get it back together coming off of the World Cup break, but then again it sort of fell away. And I think sort of going out of the Coupe de France in those circumstances really knocked the confidence, as did the Champions League exit. So I think there definitely is still that hunger to succeed, as we saw with the anniversary celebrations. But my feeling is that despite the fact that Tudor does probably have a strong argument to stay on, sort of based around sort of what we've been hearing the last couple of weeks, the fact that his heart quite clearly is still in Italy. Maybe should the right opportunity be offered, I don't know, maybe a Juventus, something like that, it could probably tempt Tudor to go. And if there is that feeling that Tudor might jump at the first sight of an attractive offer back in Serie A, then maybe that's something that OM have to sort of take care of in advance. And if they feel like they're going to be having to rebuild at some point during next season, maybe it's better to do it this summer and build towards the future with a coach who, at the end of the day, can maybe stay for more than just a couple of seasons, because that lack of stability, I think, now is starting to cost Marseille. They remain competitive at the moment. There's the question of ownership as well. I mean, we've heard for years and years the speculation that, Marseille might change hands at some point. Perhaps we're sort of closer to that happening than we've ever been before. And maybe that's what's sort of needed now to push Marseille to that next level, to give them a bit of clarity, medium to long term, where the club is aiming for. And if that means bringing in a new coach, not necessarily ripping everything up and rebuilding it, but trying to find somebody who will be a better long-term fit, then so be it, I think.
I think there's an interesting question there as well. Now that I've thought about Christophe Galtier at Monaco, I can also see Christophe Galtier at his former club where he played, his hometown club. He still got the accent, as was made clear when he became the PSG coach. Christophe Galtier, the obvious answer. I mean, whether Marseille fans would take to him particularly quickly, given his PSG past, but he's still very much a Marseille boy. He's not going to be short of offers. I just wanted to come back to a slightly frivolous, in fact, incredibly frivolous point. But you mentioned that goal in the Champions League, JJ. I don't remember that goal. I do remember Serge Kolasinac missing a big header that he probably should have scored, and that would have made a difference. But I had actually just nipped to the toilet and then I was in the lift when that goal was scored at the Velodrome, because this might sound strange, listeners, but as I do the post match interviews at the Champions League games at Marseille this season, as I did them, you've got to get down there before the full time whistle. So, and you can't be there a while. So you've got to just make sure you sort of time your run properly. And then here's something I didn't mention. 1998, you mentioned Lens in the Champions League. You know who was playing in that Lens side?
Smitsa, of course.
Smitsa.
Vladimir Smitsa. Just to bring it back.
I'm really glad for Jérémy that story about getting in the lift for post match at Marseille had you going down into the mix zone. So yeah, it's kind of metaphoric for Marseille's European hopes.
It was all you, Ian.
Oh, yeah, it's an allegory. Brilliant. Moving on to slightly less interesting things. Angers relegated, but ending the season with a fourth win of the campaign against Troyes, who they'll be joining in Ligue 2 next season. Let's see what happens with Patrick Kisnorbo over the summer. Lille against Nantes, big game at both ends of the table, really. Lille for European qualification, Nantes for relegation. Nantes started in the bottom four. They remained there. Now 2 points adrift of safety, but more on that in a sec. Lille up to fourth, though. That's also a consequence of what happened between Rennes and Monaco. Joe David with a couple of penalties. Lille apparently have scored 11 this season, which is a top 5 European league high. It's going to be interesting summer there as well with Paulo Fonseca's future. Josie Font looking to get a contract extension, which will take him through to, I think, retirement age, even though that's just been raised in France. Nantes, it really struggling, and their relegation destiny out of their hands. If you remember, 3 teams already relegated before this weekend. Nantes now find themselves fourth from bottom, 2 points from safety, as I mentioned, because Auxerre got a 1-1 draw against Toulouse. Ryan Raveloson, former Los Angeles Galaxy player, which is slightly random, keeping Angus Turod relatively happy. Auxerre have their fate in their hands. Auxerre or Nantes going down, gentlemen. So the final fixtures for those 2 teams: Nantes at home to Angers and Auxerre at home to Lens. It's Auxerre and Nantes. In a word, JJ.
Auxerre.
Going down. Oof. You're not going to make yourself popular in these parts. And Jérémy?
I think I'm going to say Auxerre too. I think it's a really tough one playing Lens to finish. As I've seen that one coming a mile away, having them on 16th just before playing Lens on the last game and facing a Lens team that's just too strong.
Wow. Right. It's as I say, two historic teams of French football. One of them will find themselves in Ligue 2 next season, along with Angers, Ajaccio, and Troyes. Time for Déjà Who, the last clue of the season. We will announce the winner in our what's been described as a gala podcast next week. I'm not quite sure what a gala podcast. Maybe there'll be sandwiches or something like that. Huge amounts of fanfare and possibly autographs, selfies, that sort of thing next week. But you've got to get this one right. Who am I? I made my Ligue 1 debut at just 18, and 2 years later was a first-team regular and a crowd favourite for my spectacular style. Starting in the north and then headed south and then west, I spent 16 years in France before my one and only brief stint overseas heralded retirement. During my career, I won the Ligue 1 title twice, as well as the Coupe de France, and I lost a continental final. Famously, immediately following one of the worst matches of my career, I set a Ligue 1 record which remains to this day. Who am I, and what is that Ligue 1 record? If you think you know who it is, quite frankly, blank looks all round here. Send your answers via email to league1podcast@gmail.com. Actually, I think blank looks all round is pretty much the motto of this podcast at various stages of a Monday morning. I'm speaking for myself, gentlemen. You're both highly clued up and know exactly what you're talking about. So one big game to go. Rennes against Monaco. This was 6th against 4th prior to the weekend. Rennes just outside of the top 5. Monaco faltering towards the end of the season, but still trying to cling on to 4th place and Europa League qualification for next season. Callum Brown saw this one at Rosemont Park.
For Traoré. Good cutback, looking for Lovro Mayer. Has found his way in. And that has been coming for Rennes. Benjamin Beau Jeu with the cutback. He gets yet another assist. Brilliant move. Beau Jeu's cutback. It's actually not his best hit. Lovro Mayer, probably questionable from Nubel, but Rennes won't care. Guiri. Rennes come forward in search of a second again. Beau Jeu with a cross. Guiri. They find the second, and that surely sealed the 3 points. Well, it all came from Benjamin Beau Jeu. Monaco don't deal with it, and Guiri gets his 15th Ligue 1 goal of the season. Beau Jeu gets it back. It's a pass into Guiri. It's right in at the front post. Maybe there'll be question marks over Nubel, but there should be question marks as to why Guiri's free. 2-0 here to Rennes.
So Rennes moving up to 5th on goal difference ahead of Monaco. Lille then, consequence of that victory at home, moving into 4th. And Monaco out of the European reckoning ahead of the last weekend of the season. Just the fixtures for them. Monaco at home to Toulouse. You've got Lille, who are away at Troyes. And Rennes, who were away in a derby at Brest, who are actually in really, really good form under Eric Roy. It promises to be a really exciting last day of the season again for the European places. Monaco, if we remember, missing out on automatic qualification for the Champions League next season in fairly dramatic circumstances. Gentlemen, Monaco falling apart at the seams, and Lille and Rennes coming up on the rails.
Yeah, I think it's been a second half of the season to forget for Monaco, because let's not forget, normally they save their kind of faltering form for the first part of the season, and they finish like a house on fire, and it's kind of gone. It hasn't worked out that way this time. There's massive questions now about Philippe Clement, and make no mistake about it. Monaco cannot afford to finish without any form of continental football. It's already complicated enough when it's not the Champions League, let alone them dropping out of any UEFA competition, full stop. So there is an expectation already that a number of big names will be on the move. Wissam Ben Yedder's sort of situation at Stade Louis II has become ever more complicated over the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot of speculation about Axel Disasi, Youssouf Fofana as well for a long time now. We know that Nubel is not going to be staying on as goalkeeper as well. So there's already massive questions that have surfaced, and before the season has even finished, and we know whether or not they've made Europe. I think Clement, it's really difficult to make an argument for Monaco continuing with him next season. Certainly the feeling sort of in and around the Principality is that he is unlikely to be there. But equally, Monaco is a very difficult sell for a manager when they don't have European football, because it makes that project so delicate, and most of the talent will have to be sold off in order to keep them sort of on an even keel financially. So, this is a massive final game for Monaco. Have to win to stand any chance of getting themselves back into Europe at the very last minute. And if it doesn't work out, I think we could see, this Monaco side picked apart, losing players that they probably didn't plan to lose because they won't have any choice but to cash in on them.
I think there was some worry for me. There was worrying comments from Crépin Diatta at the weekend saying basically that they downed tools at times this season in recent weeks. Doesn't say a lot for squad harmony. Doesn't say a lot for Clement being able to motivate them. I mean, he definitely looks like, for slight overstating it, but like basically a dead man walking. This is probably the last game. This is almost certainly the last game of Philippe Clement as Monaco coach next weekend, isn't it, Jérémy?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be. Probably the only positive you can find him is that he launched some young players that might eventually bring some transfer revenue to Monaco, but that's probably what it is. And he's his protector, so to say. He's also out Paul Mitchell. So I think there has to change, and there's going to be, like JJ mentioned, a lot of changes. If they can be in Europe, it's probably better for them. But if they can be in Europe, it could be the tree that hides the forest, kind of say, and probably prevent them from actually rebuilding properly and trying to. It's been 4 or 5 years where they're just flirting with Champions League, Europa League, and just didn't perform at that level as well. So maybe they need to actually kind of restart the whole thing and go back there. And I wouldn't be too unhappy if they miss out on Europe, because I think Lille really deserve to get there with the football that they've played under Paulo Fonseca. And Rennes, even though they had a pretty atrocious couple of months before and after that, they've actually been pretty solid as well under Genesio, and they've been really working well to get there. So I think Monaco, very much like Lyon last year, probably need that time to really sort of like recenter and refocus on what they're doing at the club, be it quite complicated in the Principality. And I think Lille and Rennes are pretty deserving of going to European football, next year.
Yeah, just to clarify that. So Lille on 66 points, Rennes on 65, Monaco also on 65, but Rennes basically just have to match Monaco's result because their goal difference is plus 16 better. I don't see a swing there. But Rennes still could catch Lille, as could Monaco if things go their way, to qualify for the Europa League. So I think that brings us handily round to almost the end of this podcast. And it's time to look ahead to the final round of the season. It's come around very, very quickly once again. It's time to take a little bon voyage. Gentlemen, 90 minutes of the campaign to go. Just a little side note, a little tearful to be watching the season disappear. It's going to be a short summer for us all, given that the World Cup break has kind of extended the season into early June. Disappointed to see it go. Overall thoughts on the season?
I think it's had its moments. I think there's been some fantastic stories. I think Lens finishing second is phenomenal, and it's something that I think we all kind of hoped that Lens form would continue after the World Cup break, and that's been the case. I do think that there's been some major disappointments as well. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. We've got one of the worst teams in Ligue 1 history, and Angers as well, going down. It's been a very unique season as well, because we've never seen 4 teams going down, and we know that Ligue 1 will change forevermore from next season onwards with only 18 teams, Ligue 2 as well for that matter. But, I think there's always, sort of positives and negatives. We knew that this season was always going to be quite tricky and very different to what we'd known, with a World Cup slap bang in the middle of it. And it's produced some positives and some negatives. But I think, by far and away, I imagine most of our sort of fondest memories regarding this season will probably centre around Lens at some point in the future when we look back on it.
Yeah, I'll echo JJ's feelings there. It was some disappointing moment, but when you think of, Régis Lebris' start of life at Lorient and Will Steele start of life at Reims and at Nice as well, Didier Gigard, all those teams able to have those crazy runs, and there's Zakarian coming back to Montpellier as well. We've seen some pretty interesting moves, and then of course the disappointing one. I mean, Lyon and Monaco not faring as well as we would. Unfortunately, the first Austrian coach to go into a Big Five league, just completely crashing Troyes down to Ligue 2, where he might stay or he might not, but not getting only a win, I think, in the whole of his tenure. We're going to miss Ligue 1 as we always do. Luckily for some of us, we're going to get into European football quite early in the summer, so we'll get some football again quite soon. But it's been a very entertaining season. The 4 relegation was always going to make it interesting. I think seeing Lens overperforming was probably overdue for a team of their caliber and for their public. So it'll be probably their season for sure.
And that's how a Marseille fan puts a good spin on finishing third. Final games of the season then, gentlemen. Marseille away at Ajaccio, which there's definitely worse places to go in early June than Corsica. Lens away to Auxerre, as we mentioned. Rennes, that Breton derby against Brest, looking to secure European football. Nice against Lyon, which sounds fairly juicy at the Allianz Riviera. PSG against Clermont, the title celebrations. Plenty of other decent games as well. JJ, what do you like the look of?
Yeah, I've been umming and ahhing about what I'd say in this section. I think I'm ultimately going to go for Auxerre, Lens. I would be tempted by Nantes, Angers as well, but for me, I think it's got to be one of the games where something is still on the line. So as much as I could be tempted by a number of the other games, I'm going to stick with Auxerre. I
think for me, it'll be interesting to see what the title celebrations are like at the Parc des Princes. See what the sort of the atmosphere of that is, and how positive or otherwise it may well be. Jérémy, where do you fancy going?
I think I'll go for the other battle of the relegation, seeing Nantes against Angers, because if Nantes do manage to save themselves, well, we'll get to see another joyous pitch invasion, most likely at La Beaujoire, which would be, which I guess wouldn't probably be the just reward for the pretty bad season they've had, but it's always good to see fans happy and being able to save yourself at the last day. I think it's a feeling that can barely be topped.
Yeah, certainly. And Nantes do have my absolute favourite all-time football flag. I can't even say it on this podcast because we get an explicit rating, but check it out because it's very, very funny. They also used it. They also did it as the tifo at the Coupe de France final, and it's basically, I guess somebody's said that in frustration at Nantes not playing up to the style that they usually are accustomed to, which is a very fine footballing style. They certainly haven't done so this season. Nantes, Angers then on Saturday. All the games as per usual in the final 2 rounds of the season being played at the same time. So there'll be an absolute bonanza of Ligue 1 football at the weekend. And you can see all the highlights of all the last games of the season, as well as every single game this season on the official Ligue 1 Uber Eats podcast, Ligue 1 Uber Eats website, I should say, ligue1.com. And please do like, subscribe, follow, and recommend this podcast to all your friends who should really get into French football, because it is the breeding ground of the very best footballing talent out there. So the Beau Jeu will be back next week with our last episode of the season gala episode, apparently. I'm very much looking forward to what that actually means. We'll be wrapping up the entire campaign, an in-depth look as well at how things might change at Champions PSG over the summer with the exclusive chat with transfer guru Fabrizio Romano. We'll have the winner of the final Déjà Who for this season. All that and more next week on the official Ligue and Uber Eats podcast in English, Le Beau Jeu. All that's left for me, Ian Holyman, to say is goodbye. We'll see you again next week, and thank you to this week's panellists, Jonathan Johnson and Jérémy Magan. Bye for now.
Here's an opportunity, Sanchez!
Outrageous goal from Gael Kakuta.
Payet again.
And Goldberg!
Messi again. This time maybe Messi's done it.